In the basement of a nondescript government building, there exists a ledger. It doesn't contain gold reserves or military secrets. It contains names. Names like Charlie Pollard, names like Freddie Lee Tyson. For 40 years, these men walked the red clay of Alabama, believing they were part of a miracle. But as the sun set over Macon County, the doctors weren't counting the lives they saved. They were counting the bodies. They were waiting for the final transition, the moment a human being becomes a data point on an autopsy table. This is a declassified confession. Welcome to the Silent Archive. The year was 1932. The Great Depression had turned the American South into a landscape of dust and desperation. In Macon County, Alabama, poverty wasn't just a condition, it was a cage. The U.S. Public Health Service arrived not as oppressors, but as angels. They sought 600 black men, 399 with syphilis, 201 without. These men were sharecroppers, men whose hands were stained by the earth they worked, but whose minds were kept in the dark by a lack of education. The doctors used a colloquialism, bad blood. Dr. Taliaferro Clark, the study's originator, wrote in a 1933 memo, "The rather low intelligence of the Negro population, the depressed economic conditions, offer an unparalleled opportunity for study." They weren't looking for patients, they were looking for specimens. Nurse Eunice Rivers sent letters to the men under the letterhead of the Macon County Health Department, promising special treatment and free blood tests. They called it a miracle cure. In reality, the treatment was a placebo or an aspirin. They promised these men free medical exams, free meals, and burial insurance. In a world where you could live in debt and die in a pauper's grave, the promise of a dignified funeral was the ultimate hook. The government was literally buying the corpses of the men they let die. The burial stipend was only paid if the family agreed to let the government perform an autopsy. Every promise, every meal, every checkup was designed to lead them to one place, the autopsy table. The untreated syphilis in the male Negro study had begun. As the 1930s bled into the 1940s, the study shifted from observation to active cruelty. The clinical curiosity of the doctors had grown cold. The treatment the men received was nothing more than a cruel theater of placebos, a performance designed to keep them coming back to the clinic. They were given rubs of mercurial ointment and capsules of aspirin, treatments that did nothing to halt the bacteria but gave the illusion of care. But the most harrowing deception occurred in the special treatment rooms, where the doctors leveraged the men's desperation for a cure. Imagine a letter arriving at your door titled, "Reminder, Last Chance for Free Special Treatment." You walk miles across the red clay of Macon County to reach the clinic, believing you are finally about to be saved. You are laid on a cold metal table, and they drive a long needle into your spine. This was a lumbar puncture, an agonizing procedure to harvest spinal fluid. The men were told this was a special treatment. In reality, it was a purely diagnostic probe to see if the syphilis had begun to rot their brains. The government was mapping their decay, not curing it. During the 1973 Senate hearings, survivor Charlie Pollard testified, "I was told I had bad blood. I didn't know what syphilis was. I didn't know I wasn't being treated." His words echo the betrayal felt by 600 men who trusted their government. By 1941, the world was at war. 250 of the men in the study were called to serve. For a moment, it seemed they might be saved. The Army's physicals diagnosed them with syphilis and ordered immediate treatment. But the Public Health Service had other plans. The PHS contacted the local draft boards, requesting that these specific 250 men be exempted from military treatment so the study could continue. They chose the unparalleled opportunity of the study over the lives of the soldiers. They were imprisoned in their own infections by their own government. The ledger of souls was growing. Every medical file was a cell, every clinic visit a reminder of the bad blood they couldn't escape. As the war raged in Europe, a silent war was being fought against the men of Macon County, a war of withholding and silence. The doctors weren't counting the lives they saved, they were counting the bodies, waiting for the moment a human being becomes a data point on an autopsy table. But every archive has a ghost. Ours is Nurse Eunice Rivers. She was more than just a staff member. She was the bridge between the medical establishment and a community that had every reason to be suspicious. As a Black woman and a nurse, she was the only face the men truly trusted. She drove them to the clinics in her own station wagon, navigating the dusty back roads of Macon County to collect the men from their homes. She wasn't just a driver, she was a social worker, a confidant, and for many, the only medical professional they ever saw. She sat with their wives in their kitchens. She attended their church services. She brought them fried chicken after their treatments. This wasn't just kindness, it was strategic. It was the social lubricant that kept the machine of the study running smoothly for 4 decades. In a 1953 report, the Public Health Service explicitly noted that Nurse Rivers was the essential element in keeping the men compliant. They knew that without her, the men would have vanished back into the fields, and the unparalleled opportunity for study would have been lost. She was the face the men trusted, but she was representing a government that was actively lying to them. She convinced them that the doctors were their friends, even as she helped those same doctors prepare the autopsy tables for their eventual arrival. The trust she built was the currency the study spent. Did she know the full extent of the betrayal? The archive suggests a haunting complicity, a woman caught between her profession and her people. She was a professional in an era that demanded obedience to the hierarchy, even when that hierarchy was leading her own community to the slaughter. Nurse Rivers remains one of the most complex figures in American medical history. Was she a victim of the system she served, or a willing participant in its deceptions? The files don't give us a clear answer. They only show us the shadow she left behind in the exam rooms of Macon County. She was the silent witness to 40 years of suffering. As we move into the next chapter, the silence begins to break. 1947 should have been the end, the year penicillin arrived. But for the men of the silent archive, the discovery of a cure was simply the beginning of a new, darker deception. 1947 should have been the final entry in the Tuskegee files. Penicillin, once a rare wartime miracle, was now recognized as the definitive cure for syphilis. The cure was cheap, available, and universally accepted. The experiment should have folded, the men should have been cured, and the ledger closed forever. But in the offices of the Public Health Service, a different calculation was being made. A meeting took place, not to discuss how to treat the men, but how to ensure they never received the cure. They feared that curing the men would destroy the purity of the study. They wanted to see the disease's natural end. The PHS directors chose the unparalleled opportunity of the study over the lives of the men. They decided to watch the disease ravage the human body until death, treating human beings as nothing more than permanent data points. For 25 more years, the silence of the state was absolute. The doctors watched as the bacteria slowly dismantled the men's bodies. They watched as the men developed gummas, soft, non-cancerous growths that rot through skin and bone. They watched as the disease turned their hearts into ticking time bombs, weakening the aorta until it could no longer hold the pressure of life. Between 1932 and 1972, 13 clinical papers were released in major medical journals. The scientific community read about the decay of Macon County in plain sight, and they did nothing. No one questioned the ethics. No one stopped the funding. The dark history was masquerading as clinical progress. The betrayal extended beyond the 600 men. 40 wives were infected by their husbands. 19 children were born with congenital syphilis, entering the world already carrying the burden of a government secret they never asked to share. The archive was claiming entire generations. In 1966, a PHS researcher named Peter Buxton filed an internal protest. He called the study morally indefensible. The PHS responded by forming a committee, not to end the experiment, but to confirm its value. They voted to continue. It would take 6 more years for the truth to leak. On July 25, 1972, the front pages of America carried a truth that could no longer be ignored. Peter Buxton had leaked the story to the Associated Press. The silent archive was finally screaming. By then, the casualty list was a testament to 40 years of absolute betrayal. The world finally looked at Macon County, but for many, it was too late. 28 men had already died of syphilis, 100 more of related complications. As the files were finally exposed, the nation had to face a question that haunts us still. How could this have happened? The experiment ended in 1972, but the archive remains open. Its legacy is not found in textbooks or clinical charts, but in the profound medical mistrust that haunts the Black community to this day. It is a haunting that transcends generations, a ghost that walks the halls of every modern hospital. To understand why this was allowed to happen, we must look at the climate of the 1930s. The U.S. was obsessed with eugenics, the pseudoscientific belief that certain races were biologically inferior. This wasn't just a fringe theory, it was the scientific justification that allowed doctors to treat men as specimens instead of patients. The Great Depression provided the ultimate cover. In Macon County, poverty was a cage. The promise of free food and burial insurance wasn't just a perk, it was a lifeline for men who had nothing. The government knew this. They leveraged the men's desire for a dignified death to facilitate a lifetime of suffering. When you ask why a grandmother in Alabama is afraid of a new vaccine, or why a young man in Detroit doesn't trust a clinical trial, you are hearing the echoes of the pink letters. You are seeing the shadow of the PHS doctors. The betrayal of trust in 1932 is the barrier to health in the present day. In 1997, 65 years after the study began, President Bill Clinton issued a formal apology. He said, "The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. To our African American citizens, I am sorry that your federal government orchestrated a study so clearly racist." But an apology cannot unwrite 40 years of suffering. It cannot bring back the dead or heal the families broken by deception. The Tuskegee experiment remains a permanent reminder that science, when stripped of its ethics, is merely a weapon. The archive shows us that progress is nothing without humanity. History, when left in the dark, has a way of repeating its most rhythmic tragedies. We must keep the archive open so we never forget the names: Charlie Pollard, Freddie Lee Tyson, and 598 others. The files are closed, for now. To the Public Health Service, they were numbers, specimens, data points. But to understand the full weight of the silent archive, we must look at the men behind the ledger. Men like Charlie Pollard, a sharecropper who believed in the promise of his government, only to find himself at the center of a 40-year betrayal. Charlie Pollard worked the red clay of Macon County for decades. He was a man of the earth, uneducated but hardworking. When the doctors told him he had bad blood, he didn't ask for a definition. He asked for help. He trusted that the government doctors knew best, never imagining that his trust would be used as a weapon against his own body. Then there was Freddie Lee Tyson. He wasn't just a participant, he was a husband and a father. The tragedy of the Tuskegee study didn't stop at the clinic doors. It followed these men home. It sat at their dinner tables. It slept in their beds. Freddie unknowingly carried the infection back to the people he loved most. 40 wives were infected. They were the silent casualties of a study that prioritized purity over the lives of Black families. They lived with symptoms they couldn't explain, trusting the same doctors who were watching their husbands die. The medical establishment didn't just fail these men, it systematically endangered their wives. Perhaps the most heartbreaking file in the archive is the one containing the names of the 19 children born with congenital syphilis. They entered the world already marked by the government's deception. Their health was compromised before they drew their first breath, sacrificed for a clinical study that should have ended decades earlier. These were the generational scars of Macon County. The betrayal of trust didn't just affect 600 men. It poisoned the well of medical trust for an entire community. The shadow of the PHS doctors grew longer with every passing year, every infected spouse, and every child born into a secret they never asked to keep. But even the longest silence eventually breaks. In 1972, the Associated Press would shatter the archive's seal. The leak would lead to the 1973 Senate hearings, where the men of Macon County would finally find their voice. In the winter of 1973, the men of Macon County finally stood before the United States Senate. The quiet, deadly clinical trials were over. The public reckoning had begun. For the first time in 40 years, the doctors were forced to answer for the silent archive. The testimonies were a devastating indictment of American medicine. Survivors, weathered by a lifetime of untreated disease and deception, spoke of bad blood and the pink letters that lured them in. The government could no longer hide behind the guise of scientific opportunity. The moral bankruptcy of the study was laid bare for the world to see. The fallout was immediate and permanent. The Tuskegee Syphilis study led directly to the creation of modern informed consent laws and the establishment of institutional review boards. The men of Macon County paid the ultimate price, but their suffering forged the ethical boundaries of modern medicine. The archive is now closed, but the ghosts remain. They remind us that the pursuit of knowledge must never eclipse our shared humanity, that science, without a moral compass, is a dangerous tool. The ledger of souls is sealed, but its lessons must never be forgotten. I am your historian for the Silent Archive. Thank you for joining us in uncovering the truth behind the Tuskegee files. Remember the names, remember the history. Until we open the vault again, stay curious and stay vigilant. The files of the Tuskegee Syphilis study were a devastation, but from their exposure came a fundamental transformation of human research. Out of the darkness of Macon County, the world was forced to construct a new ethical horizon. It was the birth of modern bioethics, a field dedicated to ensuring that data never again comes at the cost of human dignity. In 1979, the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects issued the Belmont Report. This landmark document established the three core principles of research: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. It was a direct response to the betrayal of 600 men, codifying the right to informed consent into the very foundation of modern science. The report led to the creation of institutional review boards, the IRBs that now govern every clinical trial in the civilized world. No doctor, no scientist, and no government agency can now proceed without independent ethical oversight. The men of the Silent Archive paid the price so that no future participant would ever again be a silent specimen. Today, the legacy of Tuskegee is found in every consent form we sign and every ethical review we perform. It is a legacy of vigilance. We have moved from a world of unparalleled opportunity for study to a world where the protection of the individual is the highest scientific priority. The archive's shadow has become a lighthouse for ethical progress. We have reached the end of our investigation. We have walked through the red clay, the clinical rooms, the Senate floor, and the ethical reconstruction. The story of the Tuskegee files is a reminder that history is not just a collection of dates, but a ledger of souls. Science is a powerful tool, but it is nothing without a moral compass. The files are closed, the ledger is sealed, but the names of those 600 men will echo in the halls of history forever. I am your historian for the Silent Archive. Thank you for seeking the truth.